Hello, thank you for coming. This is the last lecture before holidays of the Atlas series, and we're going to launch the program for 2024 very soon. I will very briefly introduce the speaker for tonight. This is Markos Katsianis. He's an assistant professor at the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Patras. He has studied history and archaeology at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and has received his Master in Science in GIS and Spatial Analysis in Archaeology at the Institute of Archaeology at the University College London. He holds a PhD in archaeology from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and his research approaches the application of digital technology in archaeology and cultural heritage with a focus on 3D documentation, semantic modeling, data preservation, and reuse. He has worked for the Acropolis Restoration Service and the Diplon Society for the study of ancient topography. He's a former board member of the Greek chapter for computer applications and quantitative methods in archaeology and a partner in the projects Ariadne Plus and SIDA. So tonight he will talk about the topography of urban sites and how to approach them through digital technologies. Markos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hey, hello, and thank you for the invitation to present something that is obviously a collective work from Diplon Society for the Study of Ancient Topography. It's a project that has resulted in an application, in an online application, which I will show during the speech. But since then, it gave us the opportunity to do a bit more research. So I will try to put everything, let's say, into this presentation. So, in this presentation, I will discuss the particularities of urban archaeological sites, showcasing the example of the Western Hills of Athens, a designated archaeological area, and an open recreation park at the city. We will briefly highlight its main attractions and historical milestones before presenting a recent digital mapping project which enabled a closer look on the site evolution in its dual character within the capital's urban settings. The material collected allowed the study of the gradual landscaping of the hills, which will be correlated with road network development and a marked change in circulation patterns during the COVID pandemic. The compiled dataset allows to explore ideas of contested spaces within the urban fabric and comment on heritageization processes. Although we are not very far from the place of our topic, the wider picture can always be helpful. So in the satellite image, the urban sprawl of Athens is seen filling a broad valley between several mountain ranges. Within this valley, several hills poke up like islands in a sea of concrete. Athens is one of many cities that claims to be built on or around 7 hills. The Western Hills of Athens form one of these hilly ranges and are situated in close vicinity to the Acropolis. Nowadays, the area under the name of Philopapou Hill actually includes the remains of the extensive historic Western Hills of Athens. That is 3 distinct natural features: the Hill of the Muses, with the respective shrine and the still standing monument of Philopapos, the connecting ridge of the Pnyx, the site that accommodated the assembly of the Athenian citizens in the classical period, and the northernmost hill of the Nymphs, with the shrine of Zeus and the 19th century National Observatory building. The area lies very close and in visual contact with the main archaeological sites of Athens, the Acropolis, and the ancient Agora. In antiquity, the Western Hills formed an integral part of Athens, located within its classical fortification. They housed important districts like Kyli, which formed around the commercial and strategic route at the deep hollow between the Pnyx and the Hill of the Muses that connected the city to Piraeus via the long walls. Until the early 3rd century BC, it also included parts of Meliti and Kolytos districts. After the erection of the Atichisma, you can see it in red, the hills were excluded from the city's fortified perimeter, and the area gradually transformed into a cemetery that remained in use until the early Christian period. Archaeological research has documented the site's use since the Bronze Age, uncovering further significant features that include, to name just a few, remains of the city walls, parts of the ancient residential quarters turned into burial grounds, caves and rock-cut structures like the Heptathronon, the so-called prison of Socrates, or the sanctuary of Pan. Of course, there are also more recent landmarks, like the Byzantine church of Agios Dimitrios Loubadiaris, the church and the plateau of Agia Marina, the remnants of the 1920s refugee settlement of Asyrmatos, or the quarries to the south. The Mapping Western Hills project by Diplon Society set out to advance a methodology towards the inclusive documentation of archaeological sites through digital media. Essentially, the idea was to map all remains of archaeological and historical significance and assess their preservation, detect traces of recent activities or events as the area transformed into an archaeological site, model available data to identify points of interest, lost or endangered heritage and locations under threat, present documentation through a web resource and an array. Towards this end, we try to locate, explore, and combine information about the hills in different types of documents, ranging from historical maps, recent cadastral sources, and aerial imagery, to graphical representations, including paintings, illustrations, gravures, and photographs. With respect to the archaeological record, we employed excavation reports alongside plans and drawings. We also tried to consult other scholarly sources about the distant and recent past of the area, as well as available material on the web, in blogs, social media, or other sources. Consolidating information about Philopapou Hill on a single platform aimed to revive its memory. This in itself provides a different starting point and targeting from similar applications developed within the realm of academia or state-sponsored organizations. Dipylon, functioning like a citizen science society, utilized digital mapping to connect cartography, archaeology, and history, georeferencing old maps and spatially organizing archaeological remains and historical sources, enhanced spatial accuracy and temporal resolution. This iterative process gradually enhanced the informational capacity of the collected resources, improving understanding of the area's heritage and iconic transformations. So when it comes to cartography, we try to georeference historical map sources, going from the most recent cadastral maps back all the way to the first map of modern Athens, drawn in 1831-32 by Kleanthis and Saubert. This is an example of the process of georeferencing that I'm going to demonstrate. The map depicts, that was the most difficult one, let's say, to georeference. The map depicts the Ottoman city layout before the finalization of the modern urban plan 2 years later. Its scale of 1 to 2000 allows for the depiction of very fine details in relation to the city layout and topographical evidence of visible antiquities. The original map was rectified using the measuring legend and the diagonal lines that break up the map in equal strips. What I want to stress here is that this is a very big map. It was photographed like in 9 pieces, so they had to let's say, stitch them together. And even when that happened, you had a lot of deformation because of the old paper, you know. So the good thing was that you had these straight lines on the map of equal distance that was used so that we can stitch one piece, the map in the beginning, and then using the spline function to put it exactly at the correct, let's say, measurement. So the spline function was used to make sure that the intermediate distance between lines was kept equal. Then 45 control points were used for its georeferencing, mostly surviving monuments. The total RMS error using the affine function was in the order of 2.5 meters. The map demonstrates remarkable accuracy in most parts of the city and facilitated the digitization of the final wall course of Athens, built in the late Ottoman period and demolished soon after it became the capital of the newly founded Greek state in 1832. This was used also to digitize visible ancient and modern features, as well as the road network going through and around the hills. We also georeferenced all available published excavation plans and digitized their features at the level of individual archaeological remains to allow a combined view of those that are preserved and visible, as well as those removed or reburied. Also, to assess differences in the density of ancient remains within and out of the diatichisma, and to define or delimit the areas that have been systematically investigated to date. Finally, we tried to geolocate visual evidence from the last 2-3 centuries that were available in online repositories. To our surprise, we stumbled upon numerous representations randomly while searching for material related to Athens. And there were a lot. Our approach involved documentation, providing links to the original online resources, and determining the viewpoint and angle of the original captures. This allowed us to compile a phased visual record of the hills over 3 primary periods: the early 19th century, the late 19th century, and the early 20th century. The resulting web mapping application integrates a layered cartographic background and presents a rich array of material, illustrating the transformation of the hills in tandem with urban development since the 19th century. Users can explore several historical maps, inspect archaeological features located by several scholars, combine with additional data, like the evolving road network, the quarrying activities, and the urban growth. Also, they can observe historical vistas that trace the gradual shift from a pastoral environment to a landscaped urban archaeological site. You can explore, this is online, so you can explore, you can change the different cartographic backgrounds, you can even play with it. I mean, you can see all the things that have been drawn in Cowpert map, which is another layer, another cartographic background from the late 19th century, with features that were, let's say, seen or documented in the Kleanthis map. So you can do a lot of stuff. The WebGIS map has been complemented with a website that includes further information on the Western Hills of Athens and their long history. It features a timeline containing important events in the history of the hills, as highlighted by the material evidence and historical sources. The website is a place where individual themes can be investigated while providing an additional hub for data sources that may be collected. In a sense, we had created a comprehensive internet resource for exploring the complex history of the hills and uncovering less obvious remnants of human activity. However, during the digitization process, we discovered the potential to repurpose part of the data for further historical analysis of the hills as an urban archaeological site. This data allows us to integrate recent history with modern interventions and urban development, offering a deeper understanding of the site's heritage and current use. This content could provide enhanced perspective that can inform heritage management. Moving forward, I'll use the collected material to investigate the modern evolution of the Western Hills of Athens as an archaeological protected zone and an urban recreation space. My focus will be on appropriation activities, landscaping processes, and road network evolution, serving as indicators of conflicting views on archaeology and modernity that materialize and influence heritage management. In depiction from the first half of the 19th century, the hills appear almost without any vegetation, primarily as a grazing and a threshing ground. Many significant features, such as the Philopapos monument, the Pnyx, and the tomb of Cimon, are visible and must have been considered important landmarks that connected the local population with the ancient past, including in many such places religious or magical outdoor practices that have been explored in recent publications. In Cleanthes and Saubert's map, apart from the surviving antiquities, usually carved in the bedrock, you can see it in black, we can discern the historic road network leading to the Ottoman Wall of Athens from Piraeus and the southwestern countryside. Notably, aside from the major routes in red, two secondary routes in blue traverse the Western Hills, including the ancient route of Kili, frequented by early travelers despite not leading directly to the city gates. Another route follows the ancient Varathron, a gorge-like formation that in ancient times was an execution place and which later became the grounds of the first animal slaughter grounds of the 19th century Athens. 50 years later, the hills faced new challenges. Despite being protected from urban expansion, the area turned into a major source of stone extraction for the new capital's construction. The top pictures are taken from within the Varathron, looking to the left, to the north, and to the right, towards the south. Although these are a combination of natural formation and primarily ancient quarrying activities, they are shown here to provide an indication of the topography from this side of the hill. The first houses in Thissio district were also built during the last decades of the 19th century, while in the lower images we see Apostolou Pavlou, the main route running in between the Acropolis and the Western Hills, which became a prominent road for the walks of the Athenians. We also see that for the first time we have pathways leading directly uphill towards the monument of Philopapos and the Pnyx. In the exceptional map of 1878 by Curtius and Cowpert, we get an overview of the topographical changes and the surviving antiquities on the hills. The hatched areas indicate the location and impact of quarrying activities. Moreover, the new rail line connecting Piraeus with Athens reduced the significance of previous routes, including Kili. With the removal of the Ottoman walls of Athens, new routes from the southwest into town emerged, either to the north or the south of the hills. As a result, we witness a new shift in the role of the area and its closer connection with the city of Athens. The hills are not walked through to get into town. Rather, they are becoming the town outskirts to visit for recreation. This transformation is exemplified by the erection of the observatory on the hill of the Mousses and the creation of Apostolou Pavlou Street, a prominent scenic route from the Thician rail station to the southern side of the Acropolis, nested between the Western Hills and the Acropolis. This route is linked with direct paths leading to the Philopapos monument and the Pnyx, as I showed in the photographs earlier on. In the early 20th century, changes in the use of the hills became more evident. Habitation expanded in the lower ground surrounding the hills. Notable events from this period include the archaeological exploration at the Pnyx and the ancient route of Kili, afforestation efforts by the Society of the Friends of the Forest, and the mild landscaping of the eastern side of the hills, including the formation of a garden design with parterres following, to a certain extent, the European style of the time. Apostolou Pavlou Street became a recreational district where Athenians have their walks and enjoy food and drinks. In 1938, Stournas writes, "And the shadows of the ancients, poets, artists, and philosophers that archaeologists and antiquarians always want to imagine wandering, even after the millennia that have passed, in the holy and beautiful in these places, they would certainly be surprised by the habits of the modern era, which do not understand rest and entertainment without sound, noise, music." The following year, the Office of Tourism had imposed noise and music regulations that only excluded taverns in the Theseum Square. However, to the west, a refugee shantytown emerged in the deserted quarries following the Asia Minor disaster in 1922. Refugees from Antalya in Asia Minor began to gather in the area of Petralona, followed by more impoverished groups that started to construct makeshift houses in the area of the deserted quarry. This would grow to become the Asyrmatos or the Ataliotica settlement, housing at some point more than 3,000 people in very poor circumstances. In the 1930s, we witnessed a greater stress on the hill's resources, which could reflect an added pressure from the situation of the refugee settlement and the needs of the settlers in building material. Rock-cut antiquities are marked with the word "δημόσιο", meaning public, to denote that it is public property so as to be spared from being illegally quarried or damaged. As you can see in the top left picture where, there's a graffiti, "δημόσιο", this is public place. In addition, fences are erected to protect both exposed or excavated antiquities and newly tree-covered areas. These newly established trails have been kept more or less in their original position ever since. In this rare aerial image from the southwest, located in the archives of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, you can see the relative isolation of the Petralona residential area, positioned amidst the railway, the Western Hills, and Ilissos. The housing expansion has already enclosed the Dexameni area, cutting it off from the Western Hills. The Asyrmatos refugee settlement is in full growth within the former quarry. The highlighted orange routes represent the remaining connections that link this neighborhood with downtown Athens, albeit having lost their character as main routes into Athens from Piraeus on the southwest. Using several cadastral maps and aerial imagery from the specified period, we can effectively illustrate many of the points made. The gradual expansion of the human settlement unfolds as we trace the integration of the Theseion area into the city until the 19th century, closely followed by the habitation of Petralona and Koukaki. The Acropolis area becomes part of the urban landscape a bit later, while the most recent allocation for habitation is evident between the main area of the Western Hill and the Dexameni Hill. The cohesion of the hills undergoes fragmentation, giving rise to distinct clusters. The Eastern Hills undergo excavation, landscaping, and tree planting, further integrating them into Athenian life. Ancient structures become visible and accessible on both sides of Apostolou Pavlou Street, transforming it into a prominent recreational avenue for Athenians. In contrast, the western parts succumb to illegal quarrying, squatting, and poverty, creating a virtual void in the evolving Athenian townscape. The decision to construct an outdoor theatre, Bastia's Theatre, in the vicinity, next to the ancient Kili Road, although never completed, exacerbates the disruption to the ancient landscape in the area. After the war, between 1954 and 1958, and as part of the modernization of the capital, the architect Dimitris Pikionis was commissioned the design of a system of natural paths, see the plans to the left, for the Acropolis and the adjacent Philopapos Hill. His work survives to this day and is considered a landmark of modern Greek architectural landscaping, as his interventions, which included the renovation of the Church of Loubadiaris and the adjacent pavilion, integrates fragments and architectural decoration elements of classical and classicist buildings, modern concrete and groundstones found on site, all of them united by the longing for an imaginary Greek identity. His interventions were coupled with a thoughtful planting project using mainly drought-resistant species characteristic of the Attic flora. Apart from the Pikionis interventions, the eastern side of the hills were provided with further role in the modernization of the Athenian life through the erection of the restaurant Dionysus and the organization of the first International Biennale of Modern Sculpture, which was held in the core garden of the early 20th century at the vicinity of the restaurant Dionysus, at the older garden formations. Meanwhile, to the west, the creation of the Dora Stratou Theatre for Greek dances appropriated yet another part of the hills for touristic purposes. From this period onwards, groups of tourists stroll the Pikionis interventions to the hills, which become the de facto vista location of the Acropolis. The Acropolis is used to promote Greekness to a wide international audience and features also in popular culture. Dimitris Damascos comments on the fact that in Greek cinema of the 1960s and 1970s, and I quote, "The Acropolis is being used conventionally as a symbol of ageless Hellas, somewhere everyone must visit to acquire the intuitive experience of participation and of familiarity with a classical monument. It is no wonder that the place where the dancing occurs are the plateaus designed by Pikionis on Philopapou Hill." However, to the west, the problem of the Asyrmatos refugee settlement persists, and the poverty is illustrated in the film Neighborhood of Dreams or Συνοικία το Όνειρο by Alekos Alexandrakis. The contrast was so evident that immediately a housing project under the initiative of Queen Federica began to relocate the settlers. During this period, the Petrina district is erected, to be followed by the long housing estate, or the, as it is known, the big apartment building. In this slide, I try to show the gradual transformation of the Asyrmatos area. The Petrina district materials, see the 1960 aerial image where the area is marked with red, is built in 1961-1962 at the place previously occupied by a naval base using its building material. At the foot of the quarry, the housing estate is completed by 1967, and the remaining area is cleared from what houses were left. See the blue mark. Soon after, a peripheral street is built, shown in orange in 1974, creating in effect the present western limit of the hills. This is also really interesting because you can see that there are many aerial imagery that you can use to show this transformation. So you can follow this transformation from subsequent uses either of aerial photographs or satellite images. 1974 is a Corona satellite image, which was really captures exactly the moment that the transformation has more or less completed. On the map, The contrast between the two sides of the hills becomes more pronounced and is reflected in the road network. A significant portion of the eastern side is paved as part of the Katsianis interventions, integrating the area into the monumental Athenian landscape. Apostolou Pavlou and Areopagitou streets experience increased traffic, primarily due to the tourist buses. However, to the west, paths emerge and vanish quickly as the area is gradually transitioned from a squatting ground to a legitimate residential quarter of the city. The establishment of the Philopapou Peripheral Street facilitated the creation of yet another tourist-oriented venue, the Theatre of Dora Stratou, which encroached part of the open space of the hills. Meanwhile, the Ilissos riverbed is covered by Hamosternas Avenue, resulting in the reintegration of the formerly isolated neighborhood of Petralona and Koukaki within the expanding urban fabric of Athens. In the late 1990s, the unification of the archaeological sites of the capital provided the opportunity for further intervention on the hills to enhance and conserve the visible archaeological remains and facilitate their dual use as an archaeological site and an open park. During these interventions, the ancient Kili route was excavated and a route directly connecting the two sides of the hills was constructed. Further routes on the hills were restored and enhanced, while a major intervention took place at the southern quarries, where an architectural installation tried to create an outdoor exhibition space and an open theatre that would link these parts of the hills with the life of the surrounding neighborhoods. Following the interventions by the Archaeological Service and the formal designation of the area as an organized archaeological site in 2008, several attempts to enclose the hills and regulate access through guarded entry gates and enhanced circulation routes sparked concern among local residents. Local community committees were established to protect the site's open and accessible character, repeatedly dismantling erected fences to uphold unrestricted access. This tension between the enclosed and the open management of the urban archaeological site has further highlighted the differences between the western and the eastern sections of the hills. A map perspective is again revealing. The conversion of Apostolou Pavlou and Areopagitou streets for pedestrian use further emphasized the monumentality of the wider area and added to its touristic development. The interventions conducted by the Euphoria extended the Katsianis layout to enhance accessibility to the Dora Stratos Theatre, while gentler trails were established to connect the eastern part with the neighborhoods to the west. However, despite the recent entry points that upgraded the connection between the eastern, the tourist, and the western, the residential sides of the hills, particularly through the landscaping of the Kili route, many paths are still predominantly shaped by users and lack a fixed character. You can see those marked with orange, and they are most of them, let's say, are clustered towards the west. Today, the hills remain a popular attraction due to their proximity to the Acropolis and major Athens landmarks. The focus remains on the eastern side, characterized by the guardianship of the surviving antiquities, architectural roots, and unobstructed views of the Acropolis. These contribute to the idealized, integrated, monumental landscape of the Athenian capital, welcoming visitors and hosting centrally authorized political or cultural events. At the same time, there has been a notable rise in the local use of the hills as an urban recreation space. Diverse activities ranging from sports, play, picnics, and music practice to festive communal gatherings have been documented. This also includes borderline illegal uses, such as mountain biking and rock climbing, or even beekeeping, graffiti, or squatting. The lack of urban open spaces in Athens has been highlighted in several recent studies. In the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development 2014 Factbook, Athens features fourth from the bottom in densely populated urban cores by share of green area per person, with less than a square meter per person. The situation showcases the neglect by governing authorities on environmental sustainability in the center of Athens. During the COVID outbreak, a shift in the site's use and circulation patterns occurred. Tourists largely disappeared, and the hills became a daily retreat by local residents from nearby neighborhoods. This increase in activity was obviously related with COVID related restrictions, yet it highlighted the need of the locals to have an accessible and open space for recreational use, and it also fostered a renewed connection with the site and its heritage. In relevant research for the project Life Green, through online questionnaires between the 25th of November 2020 and until the 15th of December 2020, 731 answers were collected. The questions assessing the perception of urban Greek spaces as means of improving human health during the COVID experience showed that the vast majority of the audience, 78.4%, reappraised the role of urban parks in human health. The attraction of crowds who weren't just crossing the hills or looking for the typical viewpoint of the Acropolis meant that several off-path routes were appearing, often leading to more remote areas where small groups or bubbles, as we used to call them, could isolate. Being a local myself, I tried to document this flood of people during the spring of 2021 and map their traces in the landscape of the hills. So during this relatively milder quarantine, I made subsequent visits to the hills with my GPS on to document the evolving paths and pathways. So the different colors are different, walks in the hills where I would try to trace all these paths that were appearing. And you can see some of the paths on these pictures. Mapping these impermanent paths revealed an increase in trail density all over the hills, signaling perhaps that local use for the first time overtook its touristic character all over the area. This is a rather important point to be made as it shows the value and appreciation of urban open spaces by the local communities. It's almost like, as micro veins or micropaths. Obviously, the situation did not remain the same after COVID. The flux of people that met regularly on the hills gradually diminished. Adults started meeting up in cafes and restaurants while kids carried on their activities. At the same time, Airbnb hit back. In the years following COVID, both tourism and the density of Airbnb rentals intensified. There has been a marked increase in tourist buses and minivans that are directed towards the west side of the hills due to parking unavailability near the Acropolis. Tourists are usually disembarked at the Acropolis and the drivers wait at the other side of the hills. Alternatively, tourists stay in Petralona and Thyseo and simply cross the hills via the designated routes, like Kili, to reach the Acropolis. As a result, the paths once again start to disappear due to the proliferation of vegetation. And another disheartening scenario unfolds as the west side becomes littered from the bus drivers that wait their customers during the day. Perhaps you can see the toilet paper at the bottom left picture. In short, the heightened appeal to tourists has led to increased housing prices and further deterioration of the hills from that perspective. And although tourism is expanding its radius to the west of the hills, the asymmetrical growth continues to disadvantage the local communities. So what can we glean from all this? The western hills of Athens have undergone an imbalanced development while evolving into an archaeological protection zone over the past 2 centuries. The eastern part of the hills was gradually integrated into Athens' monumental landscape, primarily serving as a viewpoint of the Acropolis, catering to urban culture and the touristic gaze, though carefully designed and through carefully designed and evolving pathways and vantage points. Meanwhile, the western part was neglected, subject to quarrying, squatting, and gradual encroachment. This dichotomy between enclosure versus openness reflects, rather than a tension between preservation and urban overuse, an ever-transforming conflict between global and local perspectives on heritage. These contesting views have been described as archaeological heterotopies by scholars such as Dimitris Planzos, following the discussion of Leondis about the creation of the modern Greek city as a modern heterotopy of ruins. I could add that in the case of Philopappou, we may have multiple heterotopies in action at the same time. And even if we agree that the enclosure model is the outcome of protective archaeological policies, well then how well have we managed to protect the antiquities on the hills? If we take coring activities, we realize that almost 16 acres of the natural topography of the hills have been affected by coring activities, which have also impacted the surviving antiquities seen and documented by early scholars. So you can see in subsequent cartographic backgrounds and aerial imageries how the quarries have evolved in different places of the hills, leading to a total of almost 16 acres of lost area. If we add to that all areas that have since been built or covered by roads and pavements, it becomes apparent that the exposed amount of land in the area has diminished over time. From the map to the right, we can see that the majority of lost remains are situated to the west side of the hills, highlighting yet again the imbalance in the preservation of the entire area. Red lost, blue surviving. In addition, several ancient remains that were initially organically linked to the hills have been overwhelmed by modern development, largely neglected in terms of reintegration with the surrounding landscape, or left to exist as isolated archaeological heterotopies within the modern urban environment. Also, remains from the more recent history of the hills also exist, both inside and outside the perimeter, the new perimeter of the archaeological site. Many remains from the original Assyrmatos settlement can be seen in the area, such as the refugee church of Agia Sotira, remains of concrete steps that were once leading up here, that were once leading up to the cliff, and even abandoned houses within and outside the site's perimeter. Even the road network contains different temporalities and relics. Aren't these part of the area's history and heritage as well? If we compare the road layout in different times, The main roads that lead to the center of Athens, Hiraklidon, Phaliru, Makrigiani, survive to this day. Apostolou Pavlou and Roberto Galli streets follow the traces of the original roads outside the walls of medieval Athens. Avandon and Aginoros streets, as well as Akamandos and Otrineon streets, interrupt the outline of the building blocks in the area of Theseion. A similar example in Kato Petralona is the Onis street. Dimofondos street follows the oldest route, constituting the timeless limit of the hills from that side. Andeo street survives to this day at the end of the Kili route. The course of Kili is generally preserved, though its position in subsequent maps shows micro-movements in different periods, sometimes following the bed, other times one or both of its banks. The current configuration chooses the northern side of Kili, apparently for reasons of protection of the archaeological finds in the bed. The path leading to the Dora Stratou Theatre is also of interest, as it follows the ancient access path from and to the hills, taking advantage of the smoother natural inclination at this point. This is here, the path leading to Dora Stratou. Ultimately, on the hills themselves, there is a constant need for the maintenance of its facilities. In recent years, there has been hesitation from the administrative authorities to invest on the hills until a more enduring and sustainable management solution is identified. However, recent moves towards the establishment of a management organization by the City of Athens for certain prominent open spaces, such as the National Garden, the Academy of Plato, and the Philopapou Hill, have raised new concerns about the nature of the proposed interventions and the preservation of the open and accessible character of the area. In analyzing urban archaeological sites, Katapokti, Skounaki, and Gomopoulou argue that between enclosure and openness, urban parks can be seen as a shared resource, implying collective use and negotiation. They advocate for a shift to a framework of collective, multi-level governance that involves local communities and wider collectives in planning and daily management without diminishing the role of institutional stakeholders or state services. The multiple heritages of the site are considered the glue for a common vision in managing urban archaeological parks like the Western Hills. Our analysis extends this vision by emphasizing the need to study various aspects of the recent history of an archaeological site, ideally involving local stakeholders and local histories. In conclusion, this study tried to underscore that urban archaeological sites have their unique history intertwined with evolving city development and societal pressures. Digital technologies and GIS in particular can be useful in consolidating material, creating accessible sources, and enabling further analysis and monitoring. Documenting this recent history is vital as it introduces the local communities that have lived and interacted with these sites while revealing both losses and gains that can inform more inclusive cultural heritage management perspectives. It allows us to see where existing policies and structures actually succeeded in protection and where they failed, or appreciate at least lost opportunities. Despite being designated recently as an organized archaeological site, much of the heritage of the Western Hills lies now outside or at the borders of the modern boundaries, or has forever been lost to development, or is immaterial, for example, the pop readings of the hills, or has nothing to do with archaeology. Rather than exclusively focusing on preserving the archaeological remains, perhaps we should also highlight the recent traces, the recent stories and memories left behind during this process of heritagization. By mapping and documenting the recent story of archaeological sites, we can approach their recent traces and enable the involvement of local stakeholders in decision making and protection without sacrificing accessibility. From all the team that contributed to all this, thank you.
Thank you very much, very kindly, for this wonderful talk. It's funny from a personal perspective. I just walked the Filopapa Hill and the Kew Street just yesterday. It's a shame. I should have done it the other way around. I would have learned so much more. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, particularly those who have also, like me, have just walked the walk, walked the wall. Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I used to run on the Philopapos, so you answered many questions that I without just looking around while running.
It's a magical place.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering two things which could be involved. Did you involve the local community in the public outreach of your research? And in any case, have you considered producing maps of the hills, not strictly based on spatial metric relationships, but on the perception of
mental mapping?
Yeah.
That's a very nice idea. No, we haven't done that. Most of this research was, let's say, archive based. Now I think it can. There are multiple ways that you can take it forward. I mean, oral history is something that is really important. The good thing is that in the last, let's say, 5 years, there have been some additions coming from actual, descendants of those people that live in the Asylmatos area. Some of them are self-editions, but they manage to sort of keep, let's say, or document these memories from the place. But if what we are discussing could be linked, let's say, to an oral history project, or also try to access other archives, like a newspaper of the time, because what I tried to stress was that this is a conflicting ground. I mean, you have people from very different perspectives, how they want to appropriate this area, and you have let's say the official policy, but you also have other stakeholders as well. And this can be traced, I think, in the press of the early 20th century, or mid 20th century, or even earlier. So you can have also archives, you can have oral history. What you're discussing about mental mapping is really, really nice, because you could actually see how these hills are transformed, let's say, in the mind of the people, and how different uses have those hills on themselves. I mean, if I try to think about myself, because now I think that I haven't left like a meter of the hills that I haven't actually gone around. It is a lot different than before I decided to embark on doing all the paths during COVID. And I found some areas that were amazing, and nobody went there. And apparently they did, because I was just following the paths. But it changed my mental, let's say, mapping of the hills completely. In terms also, of distances, of what are the really nice points to check out, where are the hidden parts. where you can find this, still very obvious archaeological traces that nobody really knows. I mean, there are 3 or 4 more hidden cave-like structures among the hills that, they're not really advertised. So yeah,
Thank you.
still a lot to do. No, I mean, you can analyze a place, for forever.
Yeah,
But
the
at
scale
least,
is amazing.
Hmm?
The scale is amazing because it's such a small area,
Hmm.
and you think that you can see it so well on satellite imaging. There are millions of maps about it, but still there are places that are not fully explored.
exactly, yeah.
I mean, I think of the parallel me surveying the mountains of East Crete, and yeah, so the scale is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I imagine how many places I didn't manage to to visit on such a large terrain.
Everybody who has been also on a survey, I mean, who actually, you walk the landscape, has a totally different appreciation of that landscape afterwards. So it's like, yeah.
And that's only the geographical scale. If you think about, you were talking about the temporal scale,
Yeah.
and then the second part you talked was very much focused on, of course, let's say our recent past.
Yeah.
But it just really shows you just with the right source material, how much. So thinking methodologically, how much these methods can really have a huge effect on how space was used through time by different societies and how they developed and how they appropriated space. And just to think of how many sources we lost when trying to model those kind of spatial, mental, whatever realities for antiquity. It just shows you just that.
And then
It
how
just
much
highlights the small
Yeah.
percentage that you were able
The
to
gaps.
really grasp
the gaps we
for
have.
the distant past. And so it's always nice, especially now that we have this kind of also this in inverted commas local, at least in my case, relationship to this very specific space. And as you're saying, this very small and then urban, within that urban development, very packed.
Palimpsestic, completely
yeah.
palimpsestic. I mean, it's vertical and horizontal, very dense.
And then still being able to detect.
And what was very interesting was that, I mean, if you see the road network, I mean, how can I verbally place it correctly? I mean, the increase of activity has, made the scale of use a lot more local. So you had a lot more. I mean, you begin with some routes over the hills, and then you end up like in COVID time with little bits and pieces of trails that happen and then they disappear again. So increase activity and then increase traces. Very localized, let's say, perception. How I mean this the fact that this site becomes part of the urban structure changes the whole use of the space and increases its use.
And the perspective of how we as researchers
Yeah.
view this space. Have you ever tried, sorry, just if any other questions in the audience, but have you ever tried to correlate your findings of mapping Toulouse with space syntax? So like
Well,
heat maps
that
or-
would be the space index is a nice technique, but it's it's a two-dimensional
It's
technique.
two-dimensional.
So the hills is something that you experience as a landscape. So it's you would need a different. Perhaps you could do something like viewshed analysis or something like that. But again, it has changed a lot because of the vegetation. From what it
From
was. I mean,
Sorrel to
no, it was empty, and suddenly it's like packed with.
Any further questions?
Hi, I like the fact that you have used the term heterotopia for the place, which is by Foucault, of course, and denotes a different place. Would it be true to say that this heterotopia, this different place, this place out of boundaries, this marginal place, whatever Foucault has called it, is a modern creation? Because I would suggest that in antiquity, the area was part of the city, part of the natural public and private life, part of religious life. But this heterotopia developed through the interaction with the urban fabric, which is very, it is a heterotopia. Today we have other examples of parks, open spaces being heterotopias in London, for example, areas like that. Would you say that this is true, that this area, which is very exciting, transformed, is a modern heterotopia, but not necessarily an ancient one?
Well, in a sense, every archaeological site that we sort of fence off or we sort of decide to protect, or we separate it from everything else that continues to evolve. So we try to maintain something that is not meant to be maintained, in a sense. All archaeology is like that. We can go into, what are we doing? But the thing is that this is also a process. I mean, it's like what I discovered was that it is the creation of heterotopias in process, and multiple as well, because you had like the archaeological heterotopy that was this kind of isolated within the urban fabric, but you also had the asymmetos heterotopy, which was like the sandy town. Let's hide it. And how we reflect on those ideas, obviously, it is a very, useful modern, let's say, notion, heterotopy. But it is, again, in a process of negotiation of how we think about it. And I mean, it is at the very bottom, it's like management policy. How are we going? Are we going to maintain it like, how can I say it? Like a classic book, let's say, example of heterotopy at the hills, or are we going to integrate them in a way that actually makes sense for this dual character of urban space and archaeological site? So, yeah.
Further questions? Comments from Markos? That's not the case. May I end with one last question? Obviously, we're not talking about predictive modeling, but what is your prediction for the Western Hills? Now, since you have mapped everything in all the groups, how do you see developments in the future?
Not very. I can't say I'm very optimistic. I mean, you end up in 200 years later, and you have like a protected zone that is a lot more encroached, with a lot of stuff that is lost, with additional pressure coming from the touristic industry, and in modern, let's say, 21st century terms, it doesn't look good. Yeah.
Unfortunately, gloomy picture.
Well, in a sense,
but indeed, the mapping, the graph or the map was very impressive. The red and blue, it's basically it's half's lost.
Yeah, it is lost a lot, and it's lost not only from the quarrying activities, but it's building and development. And the thing is that also, which is glues to the heterotopy. I mean, you have also these smaller heterotopies that are even more isolated, like the fountain in Platia Mercurii, which is a very it is also, it captures your eye when you pass by there to see this, but it's isolated.
And it is an urban litter box.
Yeah, in a sense.
Yeah, you want to term a negative, right?
Yeah.
Well, it just highlights the importance of archaeological work also for modern cultural heritage work. So to end on that positive note.
Yeah. Well, the idea is that, I mean, if you map it, and it will things go in their places and create a different understanding of both these spatial and temporal axes.
And to provide the tools for us, for also the wider public,
Yeah.
local stakeholders to understand. I think that was a very important point to also educate and to make accessible this cultural heritage that is part of the urban fabric of modern Athens. So, any last comments? If that is not the case, then we thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
And-
My pleasure, and thank you for the invitation.
And next lecture in the new year will be held as a spoiler alert. May I spoil?
Yes,
May I
please,
give a
please.
spoiler alert?
Teaser.
It's being a teaser. It's being given by Basilio Pasha on spatial analysis in Attica and the reconstruction of the Attic themes.
Yes,
So on the 22nd of January, please
22nd
feel
of
free to
January.
come back to us. Happy holidays and all the best for the new year.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.